All right, cheers and salutations. We have a very special, again, segment for all of you joining us here today. After all, 2025 is going to be an action-packed year, and Hard Lens Media is dedicated to speaking to everybody across the political spectrum and people who are trying to do good work, from activists to organizers, commentators, independent media reporters. And yes, I know occasionally we have to interview some politicians here and there. I try to keep the show fun, but I am bringing on somebody who has been also calling out and addressing the corruption, especially most notably what's happening in Congress as well. And while we are across the different aisles, I think we both can agree the system is inherently corrupt. I want to give it up for returning guest to the show, Spike Cohen. Spike, I wish we were meeting on better times. I recently had Larry Sharp on the show. We were talking about the Libertarian Convention. We were also talking about how Congress has failed the American people miserably. And I know a lot's been going on since last we spoke. I've been speaking out to your team as well, and there's a lot to cover. But Spike, how's 2025 turning out for you, my friend? Has everything been hunky dory, especially on your bingo card, or are you just surprised as everybody else?
Well, I'm certainly not surprised. Always happy to be on. 2025 personally for me has been great. I will say I also wish we were meeting on better times, but if we waited for me to come back on the show when Congress isn't selling out the American people, then I'll probably never be on the show again, unfortunately.
Yes.
Yeah, man, I'm happy to be on. Personally, 2025 has been great, and professionally, when it comes to our organization, You Are the Power, we've been doing great as well.
All right, and I do want to address that because your team did reach out to talk about You Are the Power, especially in regards towards how young. And again, we have to be careful with how YouTube will hear words, anything, because it's making sure that people aren't abused by the system. There's also talk about, again,
Yes.
young individuals being taken away from families, and also what's happening
Yeah.
at the border. So first, let's actually address something that did capture my attention, and I think we can. I can understand the pain in this person's face here. And while I may not agree with anybody saying that politicians are good people, I will say there's that rare moment where I look at somebody and I see that they have that 1,000-mile stare. Um, Representative Thomas Massey. I mean, this is a guy, if you look at his before and after picture, he's smiling and now not so much. And this is something that you tweeted out that I really liked a lot. Remember that only one person in Congress actually stood to make America great again when it actually counted, because no one else stood with him. Trillions of dollars in debt will be run up in your name, your children's name, your grandchildren's name, and handed out to foreign countries and big government agencies that spy on you and make your life harder. Hey, come on, man. The NSA, they got to do their job too. Remember, every single MAGA politician and pundit who stood against him, they are all wrong, will be proven wrong in a very short order. Thomas Massey is this generation's Ron Paul. I think Thomas Massey, personally, my pushback, Thomas Massey is Thomas Massey. And I think that's the face of somebody who's like, my goodness, we're going through this rodeo again. So let's just address some of the things that happened after the election. For example, Trump, he's going to be sworn in 7 days, but yet now there's talk about giving more money. The Biden administration's last push of giving more money towards these ridiculous wars that are happening overseas, as well as running up our budget. I remember you've been on a couple people's shows, even bringing the awareness of the budget and overall how we are going to be stuck holding the bag. Can you elaborate a little bit on this? Because I think many people are now turning their minds off of politics. And while politics isn't a happy topic to talk about, we have to address it because everybody's pocket is on fire, no pun intended.
Yeah, so I mean, this is very similar to what happened the end of 2020, like after election day 2020 and early 2021, where a lot of people, especially those on the side that won, but really on both sides, just kind of checked out of what was happening. Well, that's when some of the worst things happen. I mean, a lot of the inflation, the price inflation that we experienced in 2021, 2022, and 2023 especially happened as a result of the spending that was happening in 2020 and early 2021. I think that we're seeing a similar thing now. I think that you are seeing the Biden administration and the outgoing Congress are spending money left and right. Keep in mind, the outgoing Congress, the House of Representatives, the chair of the House of Representatives the Speaker of the House is a Republican, Mike Johnson. So this is a bipartisan screwing, as it usually is. Every once in a while, one party's completely in charge, but most of the time, it's both parties working together to spend unprecedented amounts of money, which is then immediately unprecedented by the next amount of money that they spend. And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing that they're spending money left and right. And, I think that there have been some positive signals from the Trump administration when it comes to specific issues, especially around things like blockchain and Ross Ulbricht being pardoned or being having his sentence commuted. I haven't seen any real promise to cut spending. I've seen that this Doge advisory board, they're calling it a department, but it's not really any such
No, it's
thing.
not. It's
Advisory
been advised.
board,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think some good recommendations will come out of it. If there aren't wholesale recommendations that are going to cut trillions of dollars from the budget, it's going to be window dressing at its finest, and this problem is just going to keep getting worse. Um, I haven't seen any serious signal, even during the campaign promise time of
Mhm.
last year, where Trump said, "Yeah, I'm going to cut, a significant percentage of the government." He might talk
Right.
about this specific agency or that specific program, but none of the things that are going to make any real serious dent
Mhm.
in the fiscal calamity that both parties are creating.
Yeah, and even then, I think a lot of us are also kind of taken back by the shiny distraction. And I want to give a huge shout out to Missy Winston, who I like to call one of the dauntless few and one of the uh, strong advocates for free speech. When you see something everyone's shiny to look at, be sure to look over there because that's what they're trying to distract you from. And I'm seeing
Right.
all this talk, especially with Trump, but also with Biden giving money for more wars. But then there's also the concept, which I didn't think I'd see in my lifetime, of a manifest destiny or quasi manifest destiny 2.0 taking place. Canada becoming a state, which
Yeah.
is a whole other can of worms. And then the potentially buying Greenland, which I've actually had to calm people down saying, Trump isn't the first one to propose buying Greenland. Like the most profile person was FDR, but Congress told him no
Yeah.
on that. So that's a whole other
Yeah.
thing there. Because if we're talking about if there's this talk about bailing out banks and corporations, and of course, many of these corporations have been feeding off of many Americans. Now there's talk about buying more territory, more land.
Yeah.
That's also going to hit our bottom line here too. And let's talk about really what it means as people, not just where you stand politically, be it libertarian or progressive, conservative, liberal, doesn't matter. We are seeing how our government and you have people in positions of power thinking of building their own ego and empire or land grabbing, while the while LA, a major metropolitan city, is on fire. I mean, the money
Yeah.
should go to people uplifting themselves. How do we really address this? Because that's not in the budget. And I don't recall Trump even bringing that up on the campaign, buying Greenland, unless there's something that I missed. And if so, correct me, Spike.
Yeah, I remember him mentioning it. I think his last amendment, like in 2019 or 2020,
Yeah,
early
that
on,
is
something
correct.
like that. But it was much more in passing than this has been. I do think it largely serves as a distraction. It's also a teachable moment when it comes to partisanship. You'll recall last year when Hurricane Helene absolutely devastated the Southeast, especially Western North Carolina, parts
Mhm.
of my home state, South Carolina and
I'm very
Tennessee,
sorry.
that were just completely wrecked. And at that same time, Congress and the Biden administration were talking about giving even more money to the wars in Ukraine and in Israel, and Israel against Palestine and Hezbollah and Lebanon and so forth. And one side of the aisle was not saying very much about it because that made their side look bad, and the other side of the aisle was correctly talking about the hypocrisy of this, that here is this terrible thing that just happened in our backyard, and Congress is mostly talking about sending off however many more tens of billions of dollars overseas. Well, now what we have, and Trump's not in office yet, but now what we have is there's this fire happening, and a lot of the talk is around buying new territories to add to the US. One side is talking more about that, the other side not so much. And I think that there's some partisanship there. I will say, I I think that Trump is doing his typical thing where he talks big about something in order to get something else. So I do
Mhm.
think it's like, instead of actually thinking he's going to get Greenland, instead he's thinking maybe if he can get a push towards Greenland independence and then maybe some more favorable treatment there, more access for US military bases or something like that. Same thing with Panama Canal. I think he's trying to get more U.S. Protection there. The Canada thing, I think, was entirely just to give a hard time to Trudeau.
It has to be a joke, and there's going to be
Yeah,
political
that
upheaval in Canada.
the Canada's not becoming the 51st state, but no, I mean, it is interesting, if nothing else, to show that we were told, we're gonna drain the swamp. You don't drain the swamp by expanding its boundaries, right?
Mm.
Like, you don't drain the swamp by saying, well, actually, we're gonna make the country much, much bigger. That's actual imperialism, and unfortunately, that word gets overused. But that's actual imperialism. The idea, like, oh, we're going to spread out to all these different regions and different other countries and territories. It just goes to show. I think that a lot of folks it has more to do with their team winning, and whatever their team says is just the new cool thing that they parrot, as opposed to any actual principle behind it, unfortunately.
Yeah, when I had Larry Sharp on the show, and a huge shout out to him and his program, because he's done a lot of great work with the Libertarian Party, as well as talking about citizen ballot initiatives. One thing I want to pick your brain about is, okay, what happens now? Because in 2025, right now, there's a whole calm down period, but sooner or later, we're going to get to the year of 2028. Whether or not we all make it there in one piece, hey, who knows? Maybe that's when I'm gone and off this mortal world. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, there's the concept of what happens next. And there's also going to be a big event called LibertyCon. I was recently invited.
Yep.
Unfortunately, due to situations out of my control, I won't be able to attend. I would love to, but there is a talk about what happens next, what happens with third parties. And one of my criticisms, at least towards third parties, and this goes for the Greens, Libertarians, and non-affiliate, is that while they did get a lot of media attention, more so than they did in 2016 or in 2020, and more people were paying attention, still the momentum upwards to trying to really build a true political movement through third parties is halting again. And I say this out of love, but God damn it, the Greens and the Libertarians could have done a hell of a lot better planning forward, especially in regards to building infrastructure. And I think, as much as I like to cheer on third parties, there does come a point to where it's like, okay, you guys have now 8 years to do something. You now have 4 years to do something in 2028. What the
Yeah.
hell is the goddamn plan? Otherwise, I'm wasting my time and you guys are just talking a good game and I don't want to listen anymore. So at
Yes,
least I know
I
you can't
can't.
speak for the Greens, but go ahead for the Libertarians at
I was going to
least.
say, I can't speak for the other parties. I can say that the Libertarian Party was primarily concerned about fighting itself, and who
Yeah,
was in charge. And I suspect, if I recall, in 2020, that was a big problem with the Greens as well, which is why
correct.
they underperformed that year, was because a lot of it. I don't know all the details, but I remember hearing a lot of claims of infighting that sounded very similar to my party. Here's what I'll say, man. I think politics is a conflict machine. I think that the problem with any kind of political party or democratic based movement is that inherent to the democratic process is that before we can do the very first thing that we want to do, whether it's to do something as our own political party or to do something in Congress, first we have to fight over who's in charge, and we have to have elections. And if we have to have elections, that means we have to have contests. And so if you and I are running for the same position, chair or secretary or whatever, even if
Hmm.
we agree 99.99% of the time, it's incumbent on both of us to find that 0.001% that we disagree on, and convince the people who are in charge of deciding of voting for which one of us gets that position, that not only does that 0.001% matter, but that it matters so much that you have to decide which one of us should be in that position based largely on that 0.001%. And so what that process invites is this endless series of divisions and conflicts, where we're constantly looking not for where we can work together, but
Hmm.
first looking for where we disagree, and then creating as wide of a fault line based on that disagreement to convince people that I'm the good guy and you're the bad guy, or vice versa, that you're the good guy and I'm the bad guy. And this
Hmm.
endless infighting, this endless division, which is necessary to the process, inevitably turns political parties and politics in general into an endless conflict machine where someone has to lose. Now, you'll
Hmm.
notice I said no one that actually has to win, but someone absolutely has to lose. And I've seen that with the party. And I think that, especially for libertarians, who our main belief is built around the idea of respecting people as individual human beings, and then building out from that basic idea. If our internal process of choosing people necessarily is to do the opposite and to divide people into camps and groups and teams before we get anything accomplished, we're actually undoing what we want to do. And that's why I'm less. You'll notice I'm less and less involved in politics and parties. I haven't left the Libertarian Party, and I certainly won't. But I'm less and less involved in campaigns and parties
Mhm.
and politics, and more involved in trying to find things that we all agree on, and then building a movement to work on those things. That's why I started You Are the Power, was
Yeah,
because if we are going to constantly do this division thing, I understand it's necessary for the political process, but especially where I'm trying to spread the inherent ideas that will make people want liberty, I've found that that was actually working against me, whereas what I do with You Are the Power is actually working towards that.
and I actually want to switch gears and actually talk about that because, and again, we got to be a little bit careful with the YouTube guidelines because, of course, YouTube will overreact and panic because we could be talking about censorship for that's a whole other segment maybe for another day. But
Yes,
I,
of
I will
course.
have
Yes,
to
yes.
agree with you too. Even I have been burnt out by electoral politics, and maybe this presidential election cycle is truly my last election that I'm voting in because I feel that the Greens, Libertarians, Independents, much love, but I remember telling a lot of people, "Hey, you should be planning this out. You should be doing this." And myself and Daniel, shout out to my colleague Daniel, were ignored, and we've been proven correct in regards to just how there's a lack of infrastructure and a lack of planning. And I'm not going to sit here and tell my audience, "Hey, vote independent, third party," if the parties aren't going to actually get serious. And we need people to be serious because these next 4 years will be challenging for a lot of us because the problems in 2024 are here in 2025. So
Oh
that
yeah.
being said, you are going to be part of LibertyCon, and
Mhm.
I would like to talk a little bit about that. Just give you a huge shout out and promo there. Shout out to the organizers who did invite me. Unfortunately, can't make it, but you are talking about You Are the Power, and You Are the
Mhm.
Power is an organization that's helping out struggling families in each different states, especially when it comes down to protecting children. And of course, we all know right now these are hard times for a lot of families, and we've had politicians implement rules. Let's use, for example, Kamala Harris being a truancy, laughing madman, all the while that
Yep.
has divided families. So, can you elaborate a little bit about it? Because right now we're seeing Americans face homelessness at an epic level that we haven't seen in decades, and in turn, when there's young people involved, unfortunately, the system will gobble them up or take them away from their family to protect them. But at the same time, as well as reports have been coming out as well, that sadly, even those institutions, young people unfortunately do get hurt. I hope that falls under the correct guidelines. I'm tiptoeing around
Of how to
eggshells that are
talk about this.
landmines
Yes.
and I'll talk about. So Matt, not Matt, sorry, Spike, take it away.
Yeah, so You Are the Power. What we do is we find people who are being abused by out of control government officials. And I don't say that in like a broad sense. I mean like individuals and individual families who are being harmed at the local and state government level by specific individuals who are choosing for a variety of reasons to target them or to harm them. And so examples of that are things like we've helped people who were being targeted to have their homes taken from them using abuse of eminent domain and zoning laws and things like that. We have helped charities who were helping people, homeless people and people that were in need, and were being threatened with arrest by government officials for helping people because those government officials had signed contracts with NGOs to deal with the homelessness crisis. And you can't justify spending taxpayer money on dealing with a crisis if individuals and charities are fixing the problem without your help. So they actually were pushing people out who were trying to deal with this. We've helped those charities to stop the threats against them. People that were abused and wrongfully arrested by police officers who refused to release their body cam footage to show that everything they did was wrong. And we fought to get that body cam footage released and those charges dropped. And you alluded to this. We've also been dealing with a lot of cases where people took their children, and I'm also being careful to say it the right way, that we don't get booted from some of the platforms. But they took their children to a hospital where they were subsequently diagnosed with some kind of chronic health condition. But then the pediatrician on duty ends up calling it abuse with zero evidence of abuse. And as a result, their children are taken from them. They're often arrested. They are not able to see their children. And sometimes, as a condition of their bond, they're not allowed to live with their significant other, their spouse, or their partner. So not only did they lose their children for no reason, but they are also legally estranged from their partner or their spouse. And then when they fight to get the evidence showing that their children have a chronic medical problem, they then go to family court where they get railroaded even further, and the court refuses to even look at their evidence. And when we first found out about these cases and we started fighting and finding out who the individual family court judges were and the individual caseworkers and so forth, and started applying public pressure to them and getting these families reunited, we have also along the way been learning why this is even happening in the first place. It turns out the federal government actually gives money to Child Protective Services in all 50 states, but they give it based on the number of cases that they have that are labeled abuse. And so they're actually subsidizing a specific label on a case. And that
Wow.
means everyone down the line is either getting the carrot approach of being told you'll get a bonus if you call it abuse, or in some cases they're getting the stick approach of saying if you don't have a certain number of abuse cases in your docket every month or every quarter, you're going to be fired. And so what
God.
happens is they actually incentivize everyone from on that pipeline: the child abuse pediatrician, the caseworker, the police officer, the family court judge, the foster care officials, to basically look the other way and hope that someone else comes out and says, actually, this isn't abuse. And children have been seized from families, innocent parents, where not only is there no evidence of abuse, but all of the evidence shows
Wow.
that this was as a result of a health condition. Now, you'll notice I said family court and not criminal court. They get arrested so that they can have those bond conditions on them, but very often they're never indicted because there's a much higher burden of evidence in a criminal case. And if they had discovery in a criminal case, the whole thing would fall apart because the actual evidence shows that there was absolutely no abuse, that there was, that
What?
not only was there no abuse, but that there's actually abuse on the case of on the side of the officials who are doing this harm, so that might actually open up other criminal charges against them. So instead, what they do is they just never indict, or very rarely indict, and instead they just have it handled in family court, where in many states it's completely arbitrarily up to the judge to decide what they consider evidence or not. And so this is again, I'm avoiding some words that might get us
That's
kicked off, but
that's
there are
fine.
some
That's fine.
words we all know that
Yes.
when children are being taken from innocent people and given to other people for monetary consideration, there's a term for that. And that's exactly what's happening in most, if not all, states at some level. Some states are worse than others. And
Mhm.
not only are we finding individual cases of this, applying public pressure, getting these families reunited, getting these charges dropped, getting the family courts out of their business, and
Mhm.
getting this nightmare behind them, but we're also along the way, we're getting in touch with state legislators and other officials and showing them this is a problem that we can play whack-a-mole all day long with this stuff, but at some point, yeah, I wasn't going to say it. At some point, that's the word, but I wasn't going to say it. At some point,
Mhm.
there has to be a legislative fix. The funding can't be based on a specific outcome because you're ultimately telling them they have to call it that or they're not going to get their money. There has to be at least some level of real due process in family courts if you're talking about a punishment like taking someone's children.
Correct.
There has to be some kind of burden of evidence to be able to seize the kids in the first place, more so than just a single child abuse pediatrician saying something or a single caseworker saying something. These are changes that have to happen. But in the meantime, we are continuing to find these cases, to find these families that are being harmed like this, to fight to get them reunited, and we've got many of them reunited, and to continue to put public pressure on officials to not just undo these bad cases, but to fix
Right.
what's causing them to happen in the first place.
Let me ask this. This would be a simple, basic question because I had one person in the live stream chat said, "Hey, where's this all happening?" It's happening in red and blue states, correct?
It's everywhere. It's happening, and basically we're hearing we are working in something like a dozen states already in cases, and they're
Mhm.
red and blue. This is not Democrat, this is not Republican. And in some of the states, you've got a Republican, this official, and a Democrat, this is not partisan at all. This is money. This isn't about red or blue, it's about green. It's about
Mhm.
under Title 4D, I believe, of the Social Security Act, they give money to Child Protective Services if they call it abuse. And what's happened is many of the states have harmonized their funding so that they also give more money if they call it abuse. And if they don't call it abuse, then what ends up happening is they get bare bones funding that doesn't even allow them to barely keep the lights on. And so they know they have to, it's like if you want to save X number of children that are legitimately being abused, then you're going to have to, destroy a handful of families to get the necessary funding to do so. And so, you then have, as a result, you have some absolute monsters like Dr. Barbara Knox, who has been kicked out of multiple states and is now in Florida acting as a child abuse pediatrician, who just, I mean, God forbid your kid gets put in front of Dr. Knox. It's almost certain she's going to call it abuse. And it's, this happens as a result of this perverse funding incentive that destroys families. And it's, this is, and I say this to my friends across the aisle, when you say, I want government to deal with X, you need to say, in fact, I'm borrowing from my friend Larry here, you got to say, I want politicians and bureaucrats and police officers to be in charge of this. And you actually have to take a step further back and say, I want politicians to decide how to come up with a funding mechanism to get bureaucrats to do this. And that's what this looks like. No one thinks that child abuse is a good thing, right? Everyone thinks that child abuse should be dealt with. The problem is the way government looked at it was they said, how can we fund child abuse cases so that they can get, properly dealt with? Okay, well, anytime they tell us there's a case of abuse, we'll give them money. Well, turns out every case ends up being called abuse, and they don't have to give that money back if it turns out not to be abuse. And so what happens is, because of this funding mechanism, and this goes back to what I was saying about the need to respect people as individual human beings, because of that perverse funding incentive, when that child abuse pediatrician is looking at that child who, is presenting with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, neonatal rickets, osteogenesis imperfecta, complications due to a traumatic childbirth, whatever it is that has them having this chronic health condition, instead of saying, wow, this kid needs help, they're thinking, cha-ching, this is the maximum amount of money that we can get.
Wow.
Because if you call the case abuse, you get more money. If the child gets placed in foster care, they get even more money. If the child is permanently taken from the parents, who will never see them again, and they're put in a permanent adoptive family, they get even more money. And then if it turns out that kid is sick, they get even more money. So sick child, innocent parent is like the maximum amount of funding that they can get.
I'm speechless here because now I'm wondering how many families are dealing with this, not only, let's say, in my state in Illinois, but in all the other 50
Yeah.
states as well. And I'm assuming that the number is astronomical at this point because times are tough for Americans. Homelessness is on the rise. So
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question. If it's too personal, fine, I understand it. You could leave it anonymous or whatever. But
Okay.
I looked at some of your causes and some of the cases where you help people. Some cases are closed, which means the problem got solved and the
Yep.
families are together. But when you are speaking to these people, obviously desperation and fear is in their voice. But when you're speaking to them, what really resonated to you the most in regards to helping people that you barely knew? And what is overall like your contact with them, your team's contact? Because I know you can't speak to every single person, but
Yeah.
obviously you must be hearing some stories from your teams. And there's the I guess the concept of, hey, I'm helping out somebody, but then my God, I didn't know the problem was this bad. So is there anything that really stood out to you in regards towards what you are trying to do here and trying to help out families at least stay together in a system that is far more corrupt than we realize?
Yeah, corrupt and destructive in a way that is hard to talk about without getting like viscerally angry.
That's one.
So I think the first thing that stuck out was when we got one of the first cases that we were told about, we were very, and we always are, we are very, we spend dozens of hours vetting each of our causes. So if you see a cause from us, it's legit. We spend even more time vetting these causes because we thought, if it turns out they actually were abusing their kids, we don't want that. We don't want to be we don't want to be inadvertently helping someone that actually was abusing them. And then when all these other families started coming out of the woodwork in multiple states, and we realized this wasn't just a handful of rogue agents or rogue, caseworkers or rogue family court judges or rogue child abuse pediatricians. This was a systemic problem. That struck me because I realized this is affecting thousands of people. In Georgia, they since 2020, just since the beginning of the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns and restrictions, they've lost 1,800 children that were in their care, defects. Department
1,800?
Division of 1,800.
1,800. They lost
1,800. Now, keep in mind, we don't know how many of those were, kids that were legitimately abused by their parents versus those that weren't. But they were all children. They were all innocent, and they're all lost. 1,800. That's just in Georgia, which is not one of the bigger states. So that's just how big of a problem this is. We've gotten emails from people. We've gotten leaked emails from caseworkers who have so many children in their caseworking. They have some of the older ones, living in their offices or being put in hotel rooms by themselves where they're rarely visited. We got one email where they were saying, hey, this one kid, who I forget if they were living in an office or if they were living in a hotel room, they don't have anyone to celebrate their holidays with. Can we get some stuff together to, give them a nice Christmas for themselves? That's how little contact that they're having. Now, children living in hotel rooms by themselves are absolutely rife for or extremely vulnerable for the word we're not supposed to say. So it makes you wonder how many of these children that's actually what happened to them. Going back to your question about what struck me with these individual families, because I've spoken with a lot of them. My team speaks with and works very closely with every single one of them, but I've also had a chance to speak with quite a few of them. It's interesting to note when you first meet these families and they're still going through it and they're fighting the tears and they're remaining strong and they're just in this singular, this very, they got the blinders on. I need my kids back. I need my kids back. I need my family back.
And you can see that they're tunnel vision of that.
Yeah, it's tunnel vision. They're just like, I have to get my family back. I will deal with the emotions later. And then when the dam starts to break, when the restrictions are removed, when they're able to live with their spouse again, when they're able to start seeing their children again, when the foster order is ended and they're able to come back to them, you start to see. You would think that then they go, oh, wow, I'm so glad this is over. That's when they actually start to break down because they actually have a moment to let down their defenses. And that's when you see how much it's been hurting them. That's when you see some of these families have been fighting this for years. They've lost every penny they have fighting just to even get their kids' medical records. They spend thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. And in just about every one of these cases, these are working class families. These are not extremely wealthy people. Some of them had enough means to be able to fight it without asking for help from loved ones, but some of them didn't. Some of them have racked up significant, massive amounts of debt to fight it in court, to get their kids' records back, to get their kids back. None of that matters to them because they just want their kids back. They just want their family back, and they know they did nothing wrong. And they hesitate to even talk about it publicly. That's actually where we've been very helpful. A lot of these families, they didn't want to talk about it because they were worried people would assume that they were in the wrong. You hear, I've been accused of child abuse. And unfortunately, a lot of people will assume, well, maybe you did do it. Even your loved ones might think, well, maybe you did do it. And, or maybe it's a little more nuanced than they're claiming. Maybe it's not so cut and dry. It sounds insane to say, I did nothing wrong. My kid had a bruise. I took them to the hospital and then they were taken from me. And I don't even know what happened, but I didn't do anything wrong. Who wants to say that, right? So they're having to hide this. They're having to keep it in. They're fighting it, but often their loved ones don't even know. And when we actually are able to actually get them their family back and get this nightmare over, that's when you start to really see them break down, because it's the first time in months, sometimes years, that they've actually been able to just process what they just went through. And it's horrific. It's actually a big part of why one thing that we're getting into starting this year. We actually started doing it last year, but we're going in further this year, is to actually work with free and low cost counselors to help counsel them after all this happens, to get past this horrific trauma of what they were just put through. It's absolutely horrifying. I will say one of the most fulfilling things I've done in my life is this specific work that we do with You Are the Power, because to be able to meet these families and have them say that, you know, I wouldn't have my kids right now if it wasn't for the work you guys are doing. On this earth anyway, that's about as high of a duty as I can do for my fellow man.
And, these are a couple of cases right now. And folks, if
Yeah.
you want to check out You Are the Power, what I'm going to do is when I clip this interview, I'm going to post a link in the community in the description box, as well as have it be the top pinned comment for
Yep.
this video on YouTube.
Thank you.
But I also wanted to say to people, look, it is understandable the stress what a lot of these families are under. The court proceeding, the court infrastructure is something I don't wish on anybody. All right. It is a nightmarish labyrinth of red tape and
Yep.
legal terms that you hear the person speaking English, but you don't understand what they're saying to you at all, period. And what these families are going through, it's just another example of a nation and people that need to start coming together. And look, Spike, I know that you have a busy schedule ahead of you, but there has to be a follow up to this because you hear about 1,800 kids missing. You're hearing about families being
Yep.
separated. You're hearing about the tunnel vision and the panic and the fear because there's a lot
Yep.
more to the story. So I'm going to reach out to your team to do a second follow up interview for this because there's a lot going
Absolutely.
on. And I know you're going to be speaking at LibertyCon, which perhaps not this year, obviously not this year because February is next month, but maybe next year I'll be more than happy to attend it, and maybe we will be speaking in better times. So as a final note, what can people do to help out? Where can people follow you? Because obviously you're going to be speaking more about this. Is there any kind of event or rally taking place, let's say in DC, to maybe reach out for some help from controversial statement here, maybe some politicians to help out? Is there anything that we need to know about so that way this more power can be done for You Are the Power, so that at least people's nightmares are long since over?
Yeah, so the number one thing you can do is go to youarethepower.net and sign up to become a member.
Mm.
We have regular action items on our mobile app and on our email list. Pop-up rallies that we do for these families, action items that we do, because the biggest thing that we do with You Are the Power is using our sort of viral marketing approach to get as many eyes on these cases as possible, and then to give them the individual names, phone numbers, email addresses of the officials that are doing this, so that we can all contact them roughly the same time and say, hey, stop doing this. And if that seems like it's simple, it is, but we also have a roughly 90% success rate. So it does work. It turns out these officials aren't used to having thousands of people angrily email them telling them, we know what you're doing, cut it out.
Mm.
So become a member of You Are the Power, be a part of this swarm that we do to get these officials to back off. And you also find out about upcoming events that we do as well. If you go to youarethepower.net, that's the first step to become a member. You'll get an email saying all the different things you can do, downloading the mobile app, joining the members only social media groups, the email list, all of that stuff. And that's the first step. The next step is to follow us on our social media. If you look for Spike Cohen, you can find me very easily. I'm very loud and all over the internet. But if you go to we are on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Threads, and we are on X as well, at YATP Official. Or if you type in You Are the Power, you'll probably find us as well. Follow us there because we also have updates on our causes, regular updates that you'll get if you're a member as well. And if this is what you, if you want to be a part of finding people who are being harmed, and growing a movement to help those people get the people harming them to back off with a proven success rate, and to keep doing that more and more over and over again, and just keep winning for individual families and individuals and communities. Join us at You Are the Power. We'd love to have you be a part of it.
Something, and I just want to add a note here too. Like Spike, obviously, you've talked about libertarian causes. You're part of the Libertarian Party here, and they're doing all that stuff. I'm progressive. I don't know. I have no home with any political party at this point. But look, I made a promise to myself, ending 2024, to start building, collaborating, and working with different people, speaking,
Yep.
covering events. And of course, we're going to have our debates and a little back and forth, whatever. That ain't nothing new here. But when it
Yeah,
comes
of
down to
course.
helping out our fellow Americans and these troubling times that we are in, we have to help each other. We have to boost each other up. So, I hope we can have a to be continued, because my audience
Absolutely.
in the live stream chat is, first of all, they're saying thank you for being on our show, and so I have to do a follow up. I am demanding it. So obviously, check with your schedule. I'm going to reach
Yeah.
out to your colleague, your team, and we can see if we can get this happening soon. But unfortunately, something tells me that we only scratch the surface of some of the horror stories of our legal system and what happens to families
100%.
in it. So thank you so much for your
Absolutely.
time.
I'd happy to come back on. I'm also happy. I like to say this. I am happy to have a good-natured debate with you on the things we disagree on while we're in the process of helping people and fighting abuse that we agree
Done deal.
on. If,
Done
if
deal.
we do that, then we can have those debates all day long. I'm not
Great.
interested in just debating. There are people that
Mm,
need help right now. Let's go help them.
agreed. And that's something I have to check mark full on. So there we go. So let's make that happen live and direct.
Absolutely.
Spike Cohen, everyone, please follow him, follow his work. We're going to be continuing on with the rest of our main show, folks. Because like I said, we're going to have a super show today. So thank you, Spike. We're going to take a quick short break, and then we'll be right back with more fun.
SWAT team took your neighbor today. Watch them as they walked him away. You told yourself extremists come in all different shapes. Met his eyes and lowered your gaze. Is it too late for us to ever change? We are collecting the dust of better days. They're always watching us, but we're never safe. We're not meant to be safe, not meant to escape. We aren't meant to wake. Sheriff stopped your daughter today. Pepper sprayed her twice in the face. He must have had good reason if he'd treat her that way. At least that's what they've taught you to say. But is it too late for us to ever change? Once we're collecting the dust of better days. They're always watching us, but we're never safe. We're not meant to feel safe, not meant to escape. We aren't meant to wake. Feds arrived and had you detained. Said you'd made some posts they once changed. Tased you till you felt like you'd forgotten your name, or life before they had you contained. Oh, life before they had you contained. SWAT team took your neighbor today.